Hello everyone, today we talk about the concept of poles, polarity, polarization, ecological metaphors and all this stuff for the interpretation of war, but especially politics, as we've seen from our Clausewitzian studies. So I'm starting this series of videos also to offer a guideline for uh, a broader understanding of history as far as especially the connection between politics and war. And there are lots of topics that I hinted at throughout these years, including, for example, the ones of the criticism to the concept, in fact, of geopolitics, of in fact this other concept of polarity, or other, for example, biological metaphors and or sensationalisms like revolutions, evolutions, and stuff like that. This is all a vocabulary that we have collected during the last generations for reasons that could be profitably either investigated from a historical point of view, but that has left a great, that still actually has a great impact in the way we think categorically of the world, and these all have their own flaws that are not just pure, intellectual shortcomings. They're properly a political weapon in many ways, because reasoning in a certain way about the world we live in inherently favors one side or another. And very often behind this lexicon we find specific interests, specific strategies, specific ways to make masses believe in to orient them at least in a direction or another, simply, in fact, through even just the idea that there is a pole, that there is a defined ideology around which they can stick, and that they can follow, and that it's always going to be that, and that it's an absolute. Our human mind is, of course, built to reason on the basis of simple dichotomies in a way, but of course we can do much better than that, but I mean infinitely better than that if we only gave our mind itself a chance. And that's what very often meets with the greatest resistance, because the concept is you want to trick, you want to put everything in relative terms. That's an interesting dialectic. For example, I mean, the idea of debunking a certain ideology as a form of relativism, right? That's something I believe too at a point. I did, when I didn't know what was behind that, saying, but I believe in this. Why do you want to take it away from me? Why do you want to lecture me or tell me that this thing is not true? I think you have an agenda. You just are against me for some reason. Then you understand there are different layers, different levels of all this, and it makes you realize that in perspective, there is a very primitive, simplistic way of addressing sort of much more complicated issues, so that it's not much about something being true or not true, because what the hell does it even mean? Or being, just one thing or another, black or white, left or right, right or wrong, as a matter of fact. That's not the case. Right, it's not the case with reality, and the fact that we can't understand, we can't get to a definitive fixed point, we can't get the truth, it has nothing to do with actually making relativism about it, because the more actually you sclerotize yourself in a simplistic dichotomy, the more you are distant from the truth. I mean, the way you can, the best thing you can do is to approach it, to get close to it. And dramatically, the most difficult thing is to orient yourself towards not much the right direction, but towards the right method. That is, to understand that the world as often it's described to us does not exist. Right? It's normal for us to understand how to believe in things we understand personally, and to simply having no idea of what we do not understand, because not understanding literally means you haven't gotten there, you haven't got through the thing, you haven't understood the mechanism, and therefore up to that point you will just be distrustful about it, and you will not be able to do any good, because there is no positive accomplishment at that point. And it's also normal to be distrustful, right? Very distrustful. I'm waiting, for example, of making that video about geopolitics, because I think more than 1 year ago, one of you that was actually very good follower and was very interested in my content and was very respectful in the way he addressed the thing, at some point told me, but wait, you said that geopolitics, for example, does not exist. And to me, I think he told me that, if I remember correctly, it was actually studying. I don't remember the specificity of it. It was not even just international relations, but it had to do specifically with this more broader strategical understanding at some level. And he said, I'd never heard this. To me, it's strange. I disagree fundamentally. So I would like to hear from you why it's the case. So at some point, I will make a video in capital letters, a title in capital letters, like geopolitics does not exist. And there's nothing. I have nothing against the person, and I don't want that to sound arrogant or impolite or rude or whatever. But on the contrary, I say it because I really care. And I really care for those people that especially are into the thing to get this perspective, because I can't say it simply like this without demonstrating now in the video, but because I think it's actually how it is, right? And how at least we should approach the problem, because once again, you probably sense how much behind those terms there is, politically speaking. I mean, I was now something that's completely unrelated to the example I just made with follower and so on, which I don't think he actually is connected at all with. But it happened just a few days ago. I don't know why I was searching for. I don't know what I was searching for. I came across a video on YouTube that was actually a channel rather than the video in itself, that was based on this idea of political slash strategical analysis. It was loaded with those concepts of geopolitical understanding and culture and all this stuff. And emblematically enough, that was actually a propaganda channel. That is to say, was very ideologically oriented. And he was presenting, very often behind this words, there is a lot of, even machism, I don't know how to say that, but I mean the concept that this broader understanding of geopolitics, of the various poles of power, that they're real centers of power, and it's about their military, it's about their power, about their thing, is all, this, strongly male, virile thing. There's understand very often, that those are contents that are, in fact, directed to a specific target that is surely, young men, as I can fit in it. And that indeed do need a lot. And I say it even, I know that there are many girls that follow my channel as well. And that's very flattering, but it's also statistically true that most, I say it from a statistic, that most of you are young males, right? And don't think that it's not important. Actually, it's very important. It tells so much about our societies. I think that there is a great sense of disorientation, that then if you wonder why concepts like the ones of polar world or polarizations are so, and geopolitics and areas of power and so on, are centers of power, are so propagandistically used, because they are actually basing themselves on this expectation from this part of the population, that by obvious biological reasons are there, because they want to fight, they're competitive, they're aggressive, they want to lead, right, as young men are, and as we're meant to do. But at the same time, that's misleading. I mean, there is a much more cooler-blooded and ruthless and rational and clean and neat and effective way that comes with age. It comes with more reason than emotions, and that comes with understanding. It comes through reading, but more than that, studying and understanding, really, right? Or they're three distinct things, very distinct things that you have to pass through gradually, and that require specific discipline, right? This is the problem. It's not You're not effective just because you're stronger, because you as an individual or as a center of power, let's say, or authority, are stronger than another, right? There's no absolute value in this sense. It's all the combination, the stance between you and the rest of the world that really makes a difference. And reasoning through it in simplistic terms, that is to say, there's that chunk of the world that is represented by that power, and that's basically it. And then there is another power next to it that is also basically it, and they're conflicting. And basically there is nothing in the middle, or there is specifically here a pole of power here and another there, and that's all what the world is about. Is a very misleading, simplistic, superficial, flat view of what truly the Clausewitzian Trinity is about. And Schwerpunkt is moving literally the first steps at this point regarding to this specific topics, because we never conceptualized them, we never spoke in theoretical terms about it. And I already know that there's going to be this kind of resistance to these ideas, that it's not going to be easy to address the topics. But I like to take like a bit after the other, so that I can hopefully picture you concretely why this base should be built to literally debunk these conceptions, why this is safe ground, or at least it's way safer than the other one that presents actually very few of it and doesn't develop much of a critical capacity, much of an actual, a strategical, analytical competence or understanding. It's difficult to address it just in this. But speaking of the matter, poles, polarity, polarization. The question you should pose yourself, in my opinion, in front of every single idea. Everybody's included. And of course, I am in it as well. And this is the most important thing, is how are you thinking? Right? This is what you should start picturing in your mind, because it starts all from there. It's easy to think on the basis of what others tell you, because especially if they know more, and you tend to get sucked into the idea, to be infatuated with it, to be inspired by it, whatever. But the question is, you are a thinking being, and you have a hell of a potential. You have a hell of a power on your own. You can't really make the grade on your own. The question is, how do you think? How do we think all together? I pose myself this question a lot, because every historical thing I say to me is not about the datum that I can offer. Say, I don't know, there were a certain amount of troops in that army that year. What do I actually do with it, right? If it is not connected with a specific wall that is way deeper, that is way even also here this disgusting term multidimensional, it perhaps doesn't work very much for this video's dialectic, but I mean the idea that everything is really is much more complex than what it seems. Well, the question is, we have some options, of course, and there are certain paths that have been shown to us methodologically speaking. For example, we can start from the analysis of reality and try to find meaning in it using an inductive method. Right. Otherwise, we can use a substantially deductive one by formulating conjectures and then looking for refutations or confirmations in a more or less iterative way. Then there is another way. That is actually the one I was picturing before, which is no better. That is, we have schematisms that we take for granted, and we apply them sic et simpliciter, but not because we consider them dogmas. Not necessarily. Don't think that when we are in front of people that say, okay, we talk about geopolitics or polarity, whatever, we're talking about crazy maniacs that are just brainwashed and indoctrinated. No. And that's why it's so subtle. That's why it's so effective. It seems so effective. Why it has this great success. Because after all, we all know how it works. Like we feel intellectually seduced by the idea, we buy it, and we try to use it. At that point, say, well, at some point we will understand better what it means. But for now, it's a great idea. It sounds cool. Others do it. I'm part of the group. It's fine, right? Never like to be part of groups. Always like to be alone. But that's just me. There's nothing for actually. Well, should say that confrontation with other people is fundamental for developing critical skill of any type. So actually, I honestly I wouldn't understand much at this point in my life if I hadn't got in conflict really with someone, right? The thing is very powerful. It can be annoying at the moment, but on the long run, you would say, wow, yeah, that helps and should be so, really. And the reason why we would buy those schematisms is only because we are convinced that they explain something. But the truth is that we do it because we just get them, right? We understand them. And that's something where our mind can get and say, okay, wow, I understood it. So I'm cool, right? I made it, right? I don't have to worry that I'm not part of the group anymore. Well, the case of poles, polarities, and polarizations in the political and strategic sphere is emblematic of this. A scientific metaphor that has spread despite contradicting the laws of magnetism itself, actually, that turned into an interpretative tool of reality that is good for all occasions. You talk about poles, right? It's cool. You know that the country represents a pole in the world, and it all starts from there, and that's the single thing, and there's nothing else but all the other major poles that conflict with each other, and that's the explanation, right? It's cool. It's even nice to watch. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Not even magnetism, as a matter of fact, works like that. So you can imagine how political, social, military realities can fit with that or not. So some of you may say, actually, but yeah, I mean, it may be imprecise as a terminology, but the important thing is to understand each other, right? It's like when you say, you're one of those that actually can say even Byzantine without fear of getting ripped in half. That's a different matter, let's say. It's close to it. I mean, at a linguistical level, you may think it actually connects, but here the question is much more ideologically disturbing, because one thing is like using a term just to make it quicker to understand. Another thing is to actually believe in the thing, and that's the reason why, for example, I use the term Byzantine, because I'm actually the first person that believes wholeheartedly that that's just pure Romanity of all, that they were the same thing, that Byzantine would have been an insult to them. It's not an historical vocabulary, but still, I call it Byzantine because, academically speaking, people who are expert of it do not actually mind and have developed around the term actually a much deeper understanding and sophisticated interpretive tool relatively to not just the Roman Empire, but also what all this broader, in fact, illusion or historiographical distortion and all that derived from it in our Western culture actually is about, right? So if the greatest experts call themselves like that, it's no excuse to say the same thing. But another thing is to actually believe, in the case of in politics and in strategy, that there are actual poles and that these really exist. And you can even add details. Let's say, I don't know, a pole has a greater or lesser intensity than another. The problem is with the concept of pole, conceptually speaking, that is properly wrong, right? So this is not really raising a nominalistic question out of a sickly polemical spirit. Not at all. You could say we use these terms because we want to understand that in the world there have been and do exist gravitational forces that keep it in mind, it's just another scientific metaphor, and the scientific world is not the political world, the social world, or the military world. So gravitational forces proper and specific, which attract the similar to each other and repel the different, for example. And here even the physical gravitational metaphor is covered up. So some other view that may be the most perceptive may more subtly say, and we're a more sophisticated thought, I mean, it could suggest another metaphor coming from the scientific world. Like, in reality, we're talking about strategic ecosystems, right? Systems different in terms of characteristics and endogenous species, which, say, with dynamic relationships between each other that certainly are not governed by scientific laws like poles, right? And so stop also to the ecological metaphor, but which in any case are affected by seasonal changes and political conditions, right? So contiguous areas on a political level that conflict with each other or adapt to each other, invade, hybridize, strive to coexist, and can also collaborate in their struggle for survival while remaining distinct and different. That's where we start to have a problem, really. And at that point, there would be also to point out this, that we still reason heavily with the categories that, aside from the realism of such definitions that is dramatically poor, are often connected to a specific time in history that is also when this broader geopolitical context were for the first time formulated in a way or another. And thinking specifically of the 19th century, you could say that such forms above described manifested themselves in various forms. If you look at in the old world of Queen Victoria, they had at least clear names. You said they were either colonies, protectorates, alliances, confederations, ententes, and so on, right? But these blessed poles, let's call them whatever you want, do they exist today, or have they ever existed in the past in the first place, right? Have you ever thought it in these terms? Like for many things, it can go for any kind of belief. Like when you address a certain idea, do you think did these things actually really exist? Like, how do you think? Let's leave aside how do you think we actually formulate those, but do you think they actually represent accurately reality? Like, if you were even to understand the British Empire in the 19th century, do you think it would be enough to just talk of all these things, of the colonies, of the intents, of protectorates, and so on, to describe accurately what happened within these realities themselves? Like, think about it. In fact, some of you might answer, think of the never forgotten blocks of the Cold War. Those were blocks, right? You know, there was just like half of the world it was like that, and another half was like that. Yeah, do you believe that? You know, well, you would say, well, yes, do you want to deny the opposition between NATO and the Warsaw Pact? Here it is, right? Even skipping the phenomenon of the non-aligned powers, and perhaps someone who was really not aligned, such schematisms tell us something useful about aggregative processes, about the mechanisms or formation of those same blocks, right? Does it explain it, right? Because the narrative is, okay, there were these blocks, yeah, and how did they form, right? You know, was there a moment in which from one side everybody became a communist, and that's how the world existed, and it was like that, and there were these blocks, and there was nothing in between, and but the problem is this, that these blocks actually existed as such. There were these two granitic realities that were conflicting against each other, and they were all of that throughout all the Cold War, right? And the question here is really important, because the answer is really not much, actually, despite the evident fact, and that's what can really trick so many people, that the world was governed indeed by a massive ideological caesura and by very distinct political, economical, social systems. Think about right or left, market economy, state economy, liberalism, communism. So the reasons for attractions slash rejection towards slash against one of these two poles were undoubtedly strong, and to some extent recognizable, right? And the consequences of belonging to one or the other were not indifferent. This is literally understanding that it's not that there is just black and white, but also that what exists in the middle is not just that shade of gray. Of course, these divisions played a role, but up to which point? Right? I think like robots that were just all like, from now on, I'm a liberal. I live in the liberal world. Or when there's other moment, I'm a communist, and I'm just about that. Right, and everything is only about that, and there are these two blocks, and there's nothing in between, and we all are at each other's throat for without any possible reason, but the fact that we are either from the Western bloc or the Eastern bloc. How realistic is that? Do we want to talk about Sweden? Do you want to talk about Yugoslavia? Of course. We could find a lot of internal contradictions in those blocks. And furthermore, this does not mean that both the aggregative dynamics and the relationships and internal balances of those same blocks were not structured as rigidly as we're led to think. And this is for a systemic reason that is intrinsic actually to the aggregative modality of the blocks themselves, as we were saying before. Don't think just of the blocks, but think of how and why they were created, how flexible they were, right? Even in an age in which, indeed, even just statal forms made everything kind of apparently more rigid, but that's really not. It's just a form. It's just a word, if you want. Then what will happen from the bottom to top, because that's eventually how the thing occurs, can be studied pretty damn well. I mean, you couldn't study NATO countries if you don't study their politics, if you don't study the communist agitations within it. You cannot study the near intentions. If you think about, I don't know, the actual war between the Soviet Union and communist China, the 70s. So what's with that? And in some way, albeit also in a hypocritical one, right, I said it, that the communion of interests of the members of the bloc was the aggregating factor nominally and not only the predominant one. The question is, what today? You know what Fukuyama, also in here, quite, I would say responsibly, at the end of the blocs, after the end of the Cold War, everything would have been just the progressive, spread of democracy and happiness, and the world would be at peace, and everything would be fine. Doesn't look quite it, right? Pretty damn bad things keep happening. And the question is, especially today, where we live in a world that is definitely less polar, if you prefer, if you really prefer the term, than before. So what are the polarizations we're witnessing, actually, right? Solidly ideological, political, like those of yesteryear? Doesn't seem so, right? On the contrary, every polarizing or presumed such entity has its own explicitly individualistic motivations. If there is benefit, it is only a cascade. It is not even said that there is specifically, and ultimately, Therefore, certainly they're not blocks, and equally certainly they're not poles of attraction. They are only individualistic selfishness expressed with shameless force. There are those looking for colonies, there are those looking for territorial acquisitions in neighboring countries, there are those who are essentially not interested in others, especially in obtaining their consent, has the slightest immediate impact of the budget of their country. Therefore, their structural polarizing attraction towards third parties is zero. It's fictitious, of just politics, you could say, and politics has regained its freedom. In a way, leaders have their hands free. Tactics dominate over strategy, but do not come and talk to me about poles, polarity, and polarizations, because that is ridiculous to say the least. And naturally, we will expand on such topics as far as we will at some point enter to more recent history with our videos and how they actually explain important issues. At least we will try to of especially of this great myth. Recently we talked about invincibility, right? That invincibility is one of those thoughts that also everybody can relate on. That there's a bit of this of cognitive dissonance, as far as, for example, everybody can say, oh well, of course nobody's invincible, right? We need all, because there is also a political rhetoric that has to do with the even the greatest state in the world, the most powerful ones, and we all have, I mean, at least